There we are.
This meeting is being recorded.
Right. So that means that some of you are not muted. So if you would be so kind, please make sure that you are muted. That is all of, except me and Thomas, of course. It really is important that you stay muted. But if you want to communicate, and very much hope that you will, please use the chat function to pose your questions and comments, and I'll put them to Thomas in the question and answer session after his presentation. But first, of course, let me introduce myself. I am James Freeman, and I'm chair of Bus Rapid Transit UK, usually just BRT UK. It's my job to moderate today's session and indeed the whole of this programme, which started at the end of May and runs on until the 7th of July. BRT UK, as you know, is about spreading knowledge and good practice in the field, not just of BRT, but of high quality bus operations across the board. And that's why today's topic is so interesting. It's rather a broader canvas on which to paint than many of our masterclasses, but all the better for that. So we've just 1 hour this lunchtime on a Thursday, and each of the forthcoming 2 Thursdays, remember, running through to 7th of July, and we'll be done by 1:30 come what may. Each session is a simple Zoom, as you'll notice, run by me, slightly cack-handedly, but nonetheless, we're doing it. Passenger Transport is our media partner, writing up each of the sessions for the magazine, while we gratefully acknowledge support for our advertising from Atkins. Now, it's my very great pleasure and privilege to introduce our speaker. Thomas Ableman is Director of Innovation at TfL, Transport for London, which, as we know, is one of the world's largest citywide transport authorities. Thomas is responsible for leading the testing and adoption of new mobility solutions in London and preparing TfL for the future through innovation and problem solving. This is a role he took up last year. He started his career with National Express and then Shorten Railways, and his experience led him to found and develop Snap Travel Technology, the innovative venture-backed startup where he was chief executive. Forced to a bit of a rethink by COVID's lockdown, I guess, Thomas reinvented himself by providing a marvelous weekly program of podcast interviews called Freewheeling. If you haven't come across Freewheeling, go and search it out. You'll find 8 months of weekly amazing and revealing interviews from right across the public transport spectrum. I think it's built up to being a collection of oral records of really very great value for the sort of bus archive of the future. Thomas definitely is an innovator, so you will understand why I'm so pleased that he accepted my invitation to be today's lunchtime masterclass speaker. Now, I've facilitated the screen sharing and I've pressed record, and I think I've done all I can, Thomas. So at this point, it's over to you. Share your screen and take away. Now then, Thomas has gone mute on me. That's interesting. His camera's gone off. That's quite an unusual thing to happen, isn't it? We've had him there and he's been talking to us quite cheerfully and everything has been under control, but all of a sudden we've got silence. Let's see what's gone wrong. Could be interesting, couldn't it? I wondered whether something would go wrong this week, ladies and gentlemen. It's been so easy, the first 4, and suddenly it's the place you don't want to be, sitting here waiting for the speaker to come and do his bit. We know we've got him, but he isn't actually visible just for a moment. I'm just sitting here looking at my telephone and
there we go.
So, there he is. That was exciting.
I thought that would happen again. I got a message saying that it had timed out. My network had timed out on Zoom. I hope that won't be a repeat occurrence, and if so, I pass on my profuse apologies in advance of it happening again.
Well, now you're talking, I'm sure it won't. So, Thomas, that was very good for putting me on the spot there, and I'm sure everybody is jolly glad to see you. I certainly am. So, if you'd like to share your screen and take it away, now is your chance.
Right. So, can you see these slides?
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, so I'll make a start. I had to decide how to brand this, because I didn't know whether to use a TFL slide typeface or a Thomas Ableman one. Having spoken to James, the brief I got from James is he wanted this to not just be a TFL presentation, but to be a kind of broader survey over innovation in all the various different places I've worked. So I went for the non-corporate version instead. A quick introduction to me. About 10 years ago, I was commercial director at Chiltern Railways. I will always assert that Chiltern Railways was the most innovative train operator of the franchise era, and I'll talk a bit later on about why I believe that to have been the case. But it was a privilege to work there. I joined when Adrian Shooter was the leader of Chiltern Railways, and I then stayed on throughout the time that Rob Brighouse was MD of Chiltern. I then, as James mentioned, founded a startup. Snap was a two-sided marketplace that connected small, typically independent coach operators with consumers who wanted to make coach journeys. So there were, as you know, two national coach networks who have dedicated vehicles, dedicated branding, National Express and Megabus operating from fixed locations. Snap, everyone calls Snap Uber for coaches, and I have to confess I never did call it Uber for coaches because I didn't particularly like the comparison, but it kind of was Uber for coaches in the sense that we match-made relationships between individual consumers and small businesses, in this case operators, as opposed to individual drivers. And we didn't have any of the gig economy questions that Uber did. I ran Snap from 2016, technically through to 2021 by 1 month, but Snap stopped in March 2020 for self-evident reasons. Started again in October 2020, survived 3 weeks. We then went into lockdown phase 2 and never came back. So in January 2021, I then did something totally different. I launched a blog and podcast, something I'd never expected to do, but the opportunity seemed there. I had to do something that I could do entirely from home because we were under our 3rd lockdown by that point. And talking to people, there was a sense that there was a gap in the industry for something that did, had this mantra of free thinking ideas. And it was there that I met James. He was one of my podcast guests, and I know James would hate me to say it, but he was, I think, the most popular podcast guest that I had during the entire period. And if you look at the podcast listings, which are still available on Apple Podcasts, you'll see that there were some very illustrious competitors for that particular honour. And so, having worked in an organisation of about 1,000 people, then founded an organisation of that peaked at 30 people, and then launched a venture that was entirely me. The obvious next step was to join a vast, complex city authority employing 28,000 people. So, of course, that's what I've done, and I'm now Innovation Director at Transport for London. In the course of this presentation, I'm planning on talking through different types of and approaches to innovation. And the first of those is the reason why I joined TfL, which is policy-led innovation. I joined National Express on its graduate training scheme. Every job I've done, the reason why I've done that job and the passion I've brought to it is about trying to make transport better, more attractive, more popular, and better used. And one of the things I love about TfL is that it is absolutely clear what it's trying to achieve. It has really clear policy goals. These are set down in this document, which I wholeheartedly recommend. I think it's absolutely fantastic, which is the Mayor's Transport Strategy, which is the Bible within TfL. Everything we're doing is trying to achieve the Mayor's Transport Strategy. And the reason why that 80% is written on the side is because we have very clear goals. We're trying to achieve 80% of trips within London made by public transport or active travel by 2041. We're trying to achieve 0 deaths on the road, and we're trying to achieve a improvement in London's air quality. And TfL, I've joined TfL as Innovation Director. I wholeheartedly recommend, as a way of achieving innovation success, joining an organisation that's already really good at innovation. TfL has a huge track record of innovation to achieve those policy goals. So, most famously, going back 20 years, there is the congestion charge. That has recently been augmented by the ultra low emission zone, which charges vehicles that don't meet certain emission standards for entry into a zone roughly bordering the north and south circulars. If you have any spare time after this, we're currently consulting on extending that to cover the whole of Greater London, and on what the next generation of road user charging should look like. And I would be delighted if as many people as possible participated in that consultation, so please do take part. This is my local street. I live just off this road, about 5 minutes away. It's a road called Orford Road in Walthamstow, and it was the first Mini Holland project. Those Mini Holland then became renamed as low traffic neighbourhoods, and they have been controversial. They've also been very popular. This one, the very first, was wildly controversial when it first started. It happened in 2016, and the rest of the country was consumed with the Brexit wars. In Walthamstow, we were consumed by the Mini Holland wars. We literally had campaigners going down the street carrying a coffin, forecasting the death of the area as a result of the street being reduced to buses only. And as you can see, it's not died. It is in fact thriving. And the fact that you can only get down that road by bus or bike has made it a more attractive place, and therefore made the businesses do better. But again, very clear policy-led innovation that's now spread nationwide. Contactless payment is another that TfL developed to make public transport more attractive. And all of those are designed to achieve those policy goals. But it wasn't policy-led innovation that I first experienced innovation, it was customer-led innovation. And Chiltern Railways was an outstanding example of customer-led innovation. I had a few discussions about the rail industry during the time I was running the blog and the podcast. And I got into a few online debates with people about the extent to which the rail industry is customer-focused. And I think it's a real challenge remaining customer focused in large parts of a public transport ecosystem. I think at Chiltern Railways, we really did manage it, and we really were. And there were a number of reasons why that was the case. We had a long-term franchise. We were there for 20 years. We knew, therefore, that if we invested, we would be able to reap the rewards of those investments in future. We had competition, and therefore we were able to try to win customers. And I think a huge amount of leadership from Adrian, who set the culture at Chiltern Railways. A number of examples here of things that we did first. We were the first rail operator to introduce Wi-Fi on trains, the first rail franchise actually, and the first rail operator to introduce barcode tickets. And Wi-Fi on trains and barcode tickets have now spread throughout the industry. There's a picture of me launching barcode tickets 11 years ago, in the days when I wore a suit to come to work, and where other people wore suits to come to work as well. But both of those things, barcode ticketing and Wi-Fi on trains, were introduced not because we wanted to introduce something new. They were introduced because those were things we felt would add value to our customers. And I remember spending a long time on Wi-Fi debating whether the technology would be redundant technology, whether if we introduced it, people would just have large data bundles on their phones and it would be unnecessary. But in the end, we decided that even if that was the case, it wasn't the case yet, and our customers would get value out of it in the short term. And in fact, I think it's still seen as a service that customers appreciate, though the data bundle point has come true. Barcode ticketing has been absolutely transformational in the ability for customers to access the railway quickly and easily and efficiently. And one of the things I find fascinating is that my mum, who is 73, used to get quite stressed at the thought of using her phone to buy a train ticket. But recently we were making a journey to somewhere in Kent, where South Eastern, I think, is the last train operator yet to introduce barcode ticketing. It's being rolled out on a franchise by franchise basis. And she got stressed at the thought of having to not have a barcode ticket and have to not be able to simply get it on her phone, have to navigate a ticket machine and collect a ticket that she'd pre-ordered and typing in the numbers. So it shows that the adoption of this kind of thing, there can sometimes be an assumption that certain things won't be welcomed by certain user groups, and of course that's right, but equally people do adapt and change if something is genuinely designed to be user-friendly and to attractive, and Chiltern Railways was good at that kind of thing. But while I say we were good at it, we weren't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, and this picture illustrates one of the moments in my career when I realized just how institutionalized I'd become as a public transport person, which terrified me slightly because that wasn't my intention. Because the picture on the bottom right is the station building at Bicester Village. So I was part of the team that built the new Bicester Village and Oxford Parkway extension of the Chiltern Railways network. And we spent a lot of time, I spent a lot of time locked away with architects, designing the new stations. And I was very proud of the stations that we opened. And I thought they were, and I still think they were excellent. But we also built a new station entrance at Vista Village Shopping Outlet for Vista Village itself, and they designed the interior of their station. They fitted it out. We had no role in that whatsoever, and a number of things from that experience were fascinating. The first actually was that the boundary of the railway was between the platform and their station building. So if you look at this picture you're looking at now on the bottom right hand side, the blue building, that's ours. That's the station building that we commissioned, and it's part of the railway. Whereas the picture on the top left is their station building, the one they commissioned, and it sits outside the railway, though the same length, same distance away from the trains and the track that the other one is. So the first thing is, I mean, look at it. It looks like the inside of a 5-star hotel, and it really made me realise just how different a station could be from our normal expectation of the station. That's the station waiting room. Just beyond those glass doors at the end, there's a ticket gate, a standard cubic ticket gate, and a standard Atos ticket machine, and then you're straight onto the platform. But you've got a fantastic quality waiting environment that we didn't build that, not because we didn't test the idea, but because it simply didn't occur to us. But the second thing is how much cheaper it was for them to build what you see on the top left, because it was officially not part of the railway. And I think there's something in terms of costs for us all to think about, certainly in a railway environment, about how it's so much more expensive for us to do less than for them on the top left to do more. So now I want to move on to some different approaches to thinking about innovation. And I'll start with a company that's probably the most famous company in the world for innovation. They've gone from being a tiny startup with a value you can't measure on this chart 20 years ago to a company that's now worth about $2 trillion. And that is, of course, Amazon. And Amazon has achieved this through an unparalleled track record of innovation. So if you look at some of the things they've created, there's the Kindle, an e-ink reader simply didn't exist in public consciousness before Amazon created one. Amazon Prime, where you can get anything delivered, as far as I can tell, almost anywhere in the world the next day. Amazon Studios is now one of the main filmmakers bundled in with your Amazon Prime subscription. No one had previously thought about combining deliveries and films into one product. Amazon Web Services, which is the digital platform on which a huge proportion of the internet runs. My startup ran on Amazon Web Services. Cloud computing, again, basically didn't exist as a concept until Amazon invented it. My favorite recent one, I don't know if anyone's been to one of these stores yet. They're coming, they're sprouting all around London and in other cities as well. There's a lot in London now, where you walk in, you take whatever you want off the shelf, you scan your app as you go in, you take anything you want off the shelves and just walk straight out again. And there's absolutely no need to check out at all. And I've really tried to break it. I've gone in wearing my cycle helmet and my face mask. I've taken some things off the shelves, then I've quickly whipped those things off and put the things back on another shelf, and then taken one of them off the shelf but left the other things, then put the face mask back on and put it on another shelf and then taken something out. I've really tried. And when I've left, every single time, the things that it has charged me for have been the things that I have left the shop with. And then, of course, there's Alexa. Again, voice assistants have been tried with varying degrees of success by various companies, but it was Amazon who actually made it work. So you think, how on earth, what's the secret sauce? How did Amazon manage to achieve this extraordinary track record of success in innovation when no other company has? And there's a very, very simple answer to that, which is that things you've just been through are the ones that worked. But Amazon has had an unprecedented track record of failure, and it's their willingness to accept failure, which is why they've been able to achieve so many successes. So let's go through some of Amazon's failures. So there's Amazon Auctions, a rival to eBay, which no one on this call has ever used. Those iZettle boxes for taking credit card payments that you see plugged into iPhones? Well, Amazon had one of those, and no one used it. There's the Amazon Wallet, which we don't use. Amazon Local, for local deals, a bit like, glory be, what's that thing that used to exist? I can't remember. Anyway, doesn't exist. Endless, with their shopping and fashion retail brand, which ended. There's Askville, which was their search engine. Amazon Destinations, which was their travel portal. These things, they spent a lot of money on these. The idea here was that you'd have these buttons all around your house, and each one of them is a product that you regularly buy. And when you were running short of it, you just press the button, and the thing would also be delivered by Amazon to your house. And it turns out that people didn't like to decorate their houses in buttons, and it didn't work. Amazon Story Writer, to enable them to generate more books to sell on Kindle. Their computer game, which no one played. Their restaurant review website, and no one reviewed. Haven, which was their health brand. They set up an entire health business and then closed it down again. And most famously of all, the Fire phone, which they channeled many billions, not millions, billions of capital investment into, and it was a complete flop. So, it's actually really simple. The success in innovation is actually really simple. It's simply being willing to try things, even if you don't know they're going to work, because an awful lot of organizations and individuals don't want to try something until they know it's going to work. And thinking back to my much smaller experiences with Chiltern Railways, I talked about some of the things that we did, such as Wi-Fi on trains and barcode ticketing. We also tried things that didn't work. We spent a very long time trying to roll out contactless payments onto the Chiltern Railways network in partnership with TfL, where I now work, and all kinds of obstacles got in our way, and we weren't able to do it. We experimented with Bluetooth ticketing, and it was a great experiment. It hasn't gone any further, but you could, a bit like the Amazon thing, you could just walk in and walk out and have an app running on your phone charge you for the journey that you made. So being willing to try things, and of course, in founding a startup is simply an experiment. You can't possibly know it'll work. No one would ever found a startup if they weren't willing to accept that it might not work, because the stats vary, but 90% or whatever it is of startups fail. So in that context, I want to talk about this book, because this, being introduced to this book, I am absolutely certain is the only reason why Snap got as far as it did. And it didn't get as far as I hoped it would get, but it got a lot further than it could have done. And this book is a guide to founding a startup, but it's actually an incredibly useful book for anyone with an interest in innovation or change, because it describes a way of thinking around innovation. And the key point that it makes is that anything that's new or different, so this can be a startup, but it can be a project within an existing business, anything that's new and uncertain suffers from the lack of one thing above all. And it's not money, though money is always a problem in founding a startup or in instigating a project. That thing is knowledge. You don't know if this thing's going to work because you don't know about a whole load of parameters within it. So the methodology described in the Lean Startup is to work through all the assumptions that you are making in assuming that this thing can succeed. And when you start doing that, you discover there's a lot of assumptions you're making in any new business or any project. So for example, for Snap to succeed, we were assuming that people would be willing to buy tickets on a mobile phone. We were assuming that people would be willing to pick up a journey at a location that was unmarked, that they would be willing to travel on vehicles that weren't branded with the name of the retailer that they had booked with, that they would be willing to would be willing to have a flexible timetable, and they would accept a degree of uncertainty. We were making assumptions around the technology and what it was able to achieve, and there were a series of assumptions around what we needed to be able to do. So once you've broken down your assumptions, you then work out which ones you can experiment with and how you can learn whether those assumptions are valid. And some of them, you have to do quite a lot of work. But actually, once you start breaking down the individual assumptions, it's amazing how quickly and easily and efficiently you can test those assumptions. So a lot of the validation of the Snap concept took place in a series of experiments that we ran in Exeter, not one of our launch cities deliberately, in 2016, before we'd told anyone about it, and when the business was still there was only about only 2 or 3 of us actually working on it, and they were incredibly small scale experiments, and they cost us almost nothing, and we ran, I think, a total of 6 trips. But actually, we created a version of the Snap website that was incredibly clunky and didn't do anything much, but it allowed us to to experiment on real life users to test whether or not they would react in the way that we hoped they'd react to certain events taking place. And if once we knew that, it then gave us confidence to run into the next set of experiments, the next set of experiments, the next set of experiments. So the lean startup approach, as I say, the book was written for startups, but it really isn't a methodology for startups. It's a methodology for change and innovation. And then finally, I'd like to look at big company innovation. So obviously I work in a very big company, which is TfL. And there's a picture of probably the biggest innovation of recent years, which is the Elizabeth line, which has just opened. And I use that picture because it's a picture of me in November when I was one of the privileged few to be able to go and have a look at it before it opened. And I can prove that because I'm wearing a winter coat. And it was obviously a very exciting moment, which is why I use that picture. But the point is that innovation doesn't just need to be big blockbuster innovation. And we looked earlier at some of the things that TfL has succeeded in big blockbuster projects. Things like contactless payments, the congestion charge, and the Elizabeth line are transformational to the way London operates. But actually, I think across the board, the public sector can sometimes find big innovation easier than small innovation. But those small incremental changes are also incredibly important. Big projects get big sponsorship and they get big drive within organizations. Small projects can be easier to deliver in small organizations. Brooks Law talks about if you have teams of people involved in something, how many lines of connectivity, how many lines of information. If you've got 3 people, there's 3 lines. There's for everyone to talk to everyone else, you need there's 3 connections. If you increase that team to 4 people, you get to 6 lines. 5 people involves 10 lines, 6 people 15 lines. So obviously, on this diagram, once you get to a team of 14 people, you've got 91 individual lines of connection for everyone to be able to have a bilateral conversation with everyone else involved. Once you get to the 28,000 people of TfL, you'd need a very large number of lines indeed. Now, obviously, not all of those people need to be involved, but as organizations get larger, there are more people, and that's just a function of the nature of a big organization versus a small one, which is why startups are able to achieve certain things and why organizations like TfL and other corporates are always well advised to engage directly with startups, and we do within the innovation team, to make sure that where there are people who are inventing solutions to our problems, we can use those innovators to develop those solutions. But there's also things that we can do. There's a building I'm in now. There's also things we can do as a corporate to build that culture of experimentation and to make sure that when we are approaching challenges, we're saying what's the smallest scale experiment we can do in order to work out what the solution is. Are we clear what problem we're trying to solve? Can we design an experiment that will enable us to learn if that solution is the right solution? Only then do we look to scale up. And that's one of the functions that an innovation team within a big organization has. But it's something, again, that I'd love to see across this organization and across all large corporates, public sector and private sector, developing that culture of small scale, incremental experimentation and learning, because it is harder in big organizations than small ones. And since I joined TfL, I've spent a lot of time talking to other big organizations, some of them in transport, some of them city authorities like us, some of them rail operators overseas, others within civil service, others entirely private sector. Actually, many of the challenges that exist for large corporations delivering innovation are the same, and many of the solutions are the same around that culture of incremental experimentation and identifying the problem statement at the smallest possible level and working out what you need to do. But remember, that comes back to the point we said earlier, you've got to be willing to accept that some of them won't work, because it's only by accepting that if you run an experiment, some of your experiments will fail. But what is a failed experiment? A failed experiment is simply the gaining of knowledge. So it's not a failure at all because you've gained the knowledge. Finally, I'll just talk about some of the things we're doing within TfL in that spirit. So we have something called Freight Lab and we have something called Road Lab, and both of these are ways in which we can bring small scale innovators into TfL, pair them up with the problem statements that we have, and enable them to develop those solutions within the context of being a small organization. And here are a bunch of the outcomes that those have achieved, working with small scale innovators, or in some cases big corporates, but on small scale experiments. We've got with Daimler, the German car giant, but on a project that actually said, okay, how can we take a single data set from the vehicles and use that data set to identify where there is the risk of fatalities on the road, by using effectively the car itself and the data stream from the car as a sensor. And linking back to my point earlier about corporate innovation, ties back directly to TfL's Vision Zero goal, because everything we do is focused on one of those three key outcomes I've described earlier. Similarly, we ran a project in Lambeth with Bosch on using air quality monitors as a way of then influencing traffic signalling to improve traffic air quality. And here are some other projects that are live at the moment, experimenting with different provision of bus stop information, working on improving cycling data, looking to get improving wayfinding within tube stations. And then the very final thing I just wanted to mention to this group is something else that we're working on within TfL at the moment, which is the Innovation Collaboration Framework. And this is to try to address one of the challenges around innovation within a public sector environment, which is that public sector procurement rules, which exist for a very good reason, but are also highly restrictive. And they are designed to achieve certain outcomes, and those outcomes include fairness, which is a really good outcome, but it doesn't particularly include innovation. They weren't designed to achieve the outcome of that. And that's unfortunate if you wish to achieve innovation and to solve problems. And one of the challenges that the way the public sector procurement rules tend to work is that you need to have defined your solution that you then go out to market with. But often you as the people with the problem, you as the corporate with the problem, aren't the best people to define the solution. But if you don't define the solution, it can be really hard to procure. So for problems which don't have a solution, where we need something new, we'll be experimenting later this year with the Innovation Collaboration Framework, which is a way of procuring innovators to sit on a framework contract. We fairly recruit these innovators using all public sector procurement rules, but once they're on the framework for projects, for problem statements that fit the criteria, either they're a genuinely new problem, we can then co-create with partners from within the framework solutions to those problems, giving them the confidence to invest behind those solutions because they know that we've got the ability to scale if those solutions are developed, and giving us the ability to work flexibly with an innovator so that we don't try to define the solution to the problem before we get to the point of having run the experiments to understand whether the solution we're developing is actually the right solution for that problem. So we'll be going out to market with that later this year, and that's another example of trying to bring those principles we described earlier into a corporate environment. So I think that covers everything that I was planning to say. James was very keen that I left plenty of time for questions. So hopefully that's what we've done.
And you have done so, Thomas. So thank you very much indeed. Absolutely different sort of topic this week, and thank you for making us think, Thomas, about things that perhaps we don't always think about. When you started, when you walked into Palestra, whenever it was last autumn, and sat down at your desk, what was your first thought?
My actual genuine first thought was it felt quite familiar to me because I started my career at National Express having done the graduate scheme. I was a graduate trainee across bus, rail, and coach. At that time, National Express was the largest rail operator. I was a duty station manager at Euston as my first graduate placement, but my first substantive role was in the strategy team at National Express. And National Express Coaches, that is, which is a smaller and more dynamic organisation than the wider National Express group. But it was actually a very similar environment, the one I'd moved into, leading the innovation team within TfL, just operating on a much larger scale. The second thought was that everyone was absolutely fantastic. And I think TfL is phenomenally lucky in the quality of the people that it's able to recruit. And I think that's partly because TfL has that clear sense of purpose and mission that I described earlier, and clear goals, and partly because it has a world famous brand. So there's some really good people working within this organization. And as I started to learn the organization more, it became clear that what I had hoped would be the case, which is why I joined, was the case, that people are motivated by those clear those outcomes. We genuinely are trying to achieve Vision Zero. We genuinely are trying to achieve 80% of journeys made by public transport and active travel. And there's lots of people coming up with ideas and doing things to make that happen, even in the context of a challenging environment that it's no secret the TfL is in. That is still happening.
Yeah, that's very interesting, isn't it? Right, so questions are starting to come in, Thomas. The first one from Roger French. Is it hardest for PLCs to have an innovative culture these days? Rather, he contrasts it to TfL and the SMEs because of the cautious approach of CFOs, finance officers, with one eye on the city demand for constant margin growth. Interestingly, Stagecoach seems to have lost its innovation mojo since Sir Brian has retired. What's your take on that, Thomas?
Yeah, it's a great question. To an extent, I think there's an element of truth there. Certainly, Chiltern Railways was a fantastically innovative environment. But when I left Chiltern Railways in 2016, one of the things I found really interesting is why wasn't I founding my startup within Arriva? No one particularly wants to hand in a reliable paycheck every month, and I've never been motivated by being a billionaire. One of the fascinating things when you found a startup and start talking to venture capitalists is the absolute assumption that anyone founding a startup is doing it because they want to become a billionaire. And indeed, if you don't say you want to become a billionaire, they look at you rather skeptically and don't think you're serious. But and I wasn't. Therefore, but I didn't feel that Arriva was an environment in which I could credibly say, here's an idea. It might work. It might not work. If it does work, it creates a huge new market for us. But I can't look you in the eye and say I know it'll work. We'd have to test and experiment with it. And I didn't. To be honest, I didn't even have that conversation because the experiences I'd had working at a corporate level within Arriva back in 2016, and sort of the battles to get business cases through to achieve improvements in ticketing technology and retail platforms and things that were designed to improve better outcomes for the customer across the board, told me that that just wouldn't have been a credible conversation. And I think that is a real shame. And maybe we can start to see some change to that. If you have your glass half full perspective with GBR and with National Bus Strategy, that a slightly longer term perspective might be possible. And I think that the world that I inhabited in corporate land back in the day, with franchises coming and going and chopping and changing, it was very hard to make a credible case for thinking long term.
Right. That sounds like a yes then. Rob Jack asks, having lived in London between 1998 and 2018, I saw firsthand how innovation and tech transformed the travel experience. Oyster and then capped contactless payment was huge, while open data pushed real-time information to apps on my phone. What do you think will be the big advances for the next 10 to 20 years? Will it be a more personalized travel experience and relationship with travelers?
I mean, to an extent, one of the things that we are, that we're consulting on at the moment is around next generation road user charging. And I repeat my request to fill in the consultation form if anyone's at all interested in this space. But I think, depending on where that goes, what people tell us they want, and where we land with that, the potential to think about all of the modes that exist and to build customer relationships across all of those modes feels a hugely exciting opportunity, and one that we need to see where that lands. But TfL already operates across all of those, but as individual quite binary schemes on the roads. You pay a congestion charge or you don't. You pay a ULEZ charge or you don't. The mayor has said that he's keen to look at distance-based charging, different models of charging. Well, those things start to look more like public transport fares. So actually, then, can you create that more integrated experience? I don't know, but the technology exists to make things like that possible. And we know that the closer the relationship that we can have with customers, the better the experience we can offer them.
Now, Peter White has a more personal question. He's interested to know whether, had COVID-19 not occurred, would you have continued to run and develop Snap? And if so, how might you have modified the concept?
Yes, I would, undoubtedly. I had absolutely no intention of quitting in March 2020. Where we were in March 2020 is that we had a network of cities that we were connecting on a semi-scheduled basis between using a network of independent operators, and demand enabled us to flex that, but there was an element of predictability. There was always going to be services on a Friday, there was always going to be services on a Saturday, always going to be services on a Sunday, and then other things operate in response to demand, and we'd add additional capacity in response to demand, etc., etc. We had just launched an events platform. Literally, we had one event, which was Greta Thunberg's rally in Bristol at the end of February, and that events platform allowed users to create events on the platform, to co-create, to then say where they were coming from, to aggregate their demand to those events, for us to provide event organizers with their own URL and page that they could embed into their own social media to say, here's how you can come to the event. So that was something that felt really exciting. And the other thing that I had we had the opportunity. So the other thing that was important where we'd got to in February 2020 is it was literally our first ever month that we'd achieved gross margin profitability. The costs of the coaches were paid for by the customers traveling on them, and therefore we had the ability simply to do more and to go into new cities, knowing that the model was paying for itself, and it took a while to get there. So I think we'd have probably, the other thing that I think we would have liked to do, which we never quite got right, was to give the operator more freedom and flexibility, because it was very much a push. It was, here's the customer's demand, that generates a trip request, do you want this trip or not? But actually, one of the things we hadn't done is create a pull whereby an operator could say, well, actually, I've got far too many vehicles available on this particular day, and I've already committed to paying a driver, so I might as well use them. So can you push back to your users the fact that we've got the ability to provide lower cost capacity from this location than they might otherwise have been, and where do they want to go? And that kind of push and pull was something that we hadn't started any development work on that. There's something there in our minds that we could have done.
Well, I'm sure you could talk forever about Snap, because it was a fascinating thing, and I was there with that Greta Thunberg event in Bristol. It rained. Now, coming back to more prosaic things, Peter Shelley's interested in bus journey times in London, and he wonders whether this problem of slowing bus journey times can be addressed, and if demand is to grow, can costs be controlled, and what do you think about all of that?
Absolutely. I mean, it's absolutely fundamental. And one of the first things I did when I got to TfL was read the bus action plan that was then being drafted, and it's now been published. And I think it's really, really important that TfL has issued the bus action plan. We had various other modal action plans over the previous years before I joined, but to put a marker in the sand to say, this is the fundamental importance of buses, this is what we as TfL can do, but actually we don't operate most of the roads in London, this is what the support we need from the boroughs in order to deliver those reduced journey times, was absolutely fundamental. And again, we are, I don't know if I mentioned this, but we're consulting on part of a consultation expanded view, next generation road pricing, but the ability to do things like distance-based charging, if that's where we get to, would also be extremely valuable in being able to prioritize different forms of traffic on the roads. But I think it's something that, because COVID happened, there was a kind of a period of distraction, but things like the bus action plan show this is of fundamental importance, and this is what TfL wants to do. But it is a partnership, and it's a partnership between TfL boroughs and many others, but above all TfL and boroughs.
Interesting, isn't it? Just keeping with the buses, Thomas, Tony Wilson, who works for TfL, of course, He's interested in the 63 route improvements. I'm aware of glossy new buses with lots of different features. Is there any early feedback, he asks, available about the passenger response to those Route 63 improvements? For example, are any changes showing particular benefits, or are there some that do not seem to be providing value for money?
I honestly don't know. I haven't seen it yet, though I know the work's being done. There was the most fantastic TikTok video that somebody made about their journey on the Route 63, which I was very glad to see, because it reminded me again of Snap days, when we one of the things that we did at Snap is we used football team coaches quite a lot. And these, I don't know how many of the people on the call have travelled on a football team coach. My guess is quite a few, and they are often designed with a spectacular specification and then sit in the yard for 6 days of the week. And so we put them to work as a way of just really highlighting to the customer how special coach travel can be. And we got some incredible social media videos of customers just getting on and sort of videoing and saying, wow, this is amazing, So seeing that TikTok video about the 63 was great, because it was a real, that same sense of customers getting on and just being wowed, which is what you want.
It's interesting, isn't it? Switching tack slightly, Roger earlier was saying, the PLCs are, and I think you were agreeing, PLCs are difficult places for innovation these days, perhaps. Matt Gamble says, what about local authorities? They can often be characterized as risk averse and can be expected, therefore, to suffer from inhibited innovation. Is there a view as to how local authorities can be more accepting of failure? It's an interesting point you've made, I think, very strongly, and therefore more likely to be innovative. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of local authorities, especially outside London, actually, one of the biggest challenges is just literally the number of people involved, and therefore the time and the headspace they're able to give to transport challenges. And if you've got the entire road network, the entire bus network, the entire cycleways network, and everything else to think about, and you're one person, then you won't have that much time to think about innovation. And I think that we're starting to see some recognition of that, which is excellent. But on the acceptance of failure thing, I think part of it is just saying it, because I think that often it's hard to say we're going to try 4 things and 3 of them won't work. But that's our plan. We don't know which 3, and if we knew which 3, we wouldn't do those 3. But the whole point is we don't know which 3. So I think if you can just say that, my experience is that people get that. That's okay. I think if you write a business case that says I'm going to do this project and I'm going to give you £10 million in 2 years, and then you don't, well then people are understandably a bit grumpy and quite like their £10 million. But if you say I've got an idea, and in fact I've got several ideas, and each of my ideas might generate £30 million, but I don't know which one will make it, so we'll try all of them. But I really don't know if any of them will get there. That people can be a lot more expecting that, and obviously, funds have to be made available, and and local authorities are cash constrained at the moment. But equally, one of the things about this is that the honesty of saying when something is an experiment and might not work enables you to do 2 things. One, it enables you to only spend the money necessary to achieve the learning, whereas often people will take a project and do an attempt to roll it out without having done that initial experiment stage, which means you're spending far more upfront, and therefore your business case demand is far more upfront. And secondly, asserting that something might fail sounds like it's a risk, but actually there's very few projects that are certain to succeed that are in any way innovative. Therefore, it's actually much lower risk, just to be clear about that, than to assert that something is certain to succeed because that feels like the best way of getting the money, because that just poisons the well of future innovation.
Okay, well now, thank you for that. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, so there's one last question, which is a pity because there are actually 2 left, and we're not going to get to both of them. But Patrick Warner is interested in the situation outside London. I mean, recognizing that you're in TfL, of course, but more and more national policy and funding is being directed into public sector hands across the bus industry. Do you agree that sharing of innovation experience across multiple authorities could be a good way of ensuring some of the ideas that are good have the best way of surviving in suitable environments?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's never a bad thing to share ideas and experience, which is why I do things like this, because I get to hear the questions. They help me think. I come and listen to other people's. They help me think. So sharing ideas and experience is a very good one. But I wouldn't say it's an alternative to running your own experiments, because it can be seen as a substitute, and actually, well, you've still got to do the experiment, so don't not to do that. And secondly, the experiences can be different in different places. Something that works in one place for various reasons might not succeed in another. But absolutely, I 100% agree, definitely.
I'm tempted to ask the last question on the list here, because it's actually a great big one, but and we haven't got time to answer it, I suspect, because David Jenkins asked what kind of innovations could reverse the decline of bus patronage in London, and then he says, or is that an area that TfL isn't interested in? Question mark. Well, you've got a minute, Thomas, to answer that.
I mean, I don't know. And that's why we're doing the Route 63 experiment, and that's why we're running a whole load of trials, and we're going to continue to run different experiments. We're going to try different things, and we'll see. And there's obviously big things such as the various topics we talked about earlier, but there's also things, bus action plan, but there's also just testing and experimenting and learning, and testing and experimenting and learning, and that's what we'll be doing as well.
Yeah, that's great. And I think and that kind of underlines the whole essence of what you're talking about, isn't it? Which is, it's all about trial and error. And I think the lesson that I will take away from today is it's that don't be frightened of error, and don't be scared of not succeeding, and try to persuade other people not to be scared of it as well. So Thomas, thank you for your words of wisdom today. Absolutely fascinating to take us into areas which are around the outside of the world that we're normally in, and make us think about it. So most useful and informative session. Thank you. Now, thanks as ever to all of you, our audience, as well, for your interest and for your comments and questions. As I said at the beginning, the program has been recorded, although not quite the first little bit, because I nearly forgot to do it. And it will be uploaded in due course, hopefully this afternoon, onto YouTube. You'll be able to access it and all the previous 4 lunchtime masterclasses by going to Passenger Transport's website, which reminds me that I must thank our media partners, Rob Jack and Andrew Garnett at Passenger Transport, who are reporting on these sessions as they unfold. And I'm also very grateful, and always say thank you to Ray Stenning at Best Impressions, who produced our super advert, which has got you all on board, and to Atkins for supporting the whole thing financially. I should also mention BRT UK colleagues, Patrick Warner, who's on the call today, and John Carr, as well as other BRT UK board members who've been working behind the scenes to ensure that this series of lunchtime masterclasses supported by Atkins has worked out. So please watch the next edition of Passenger Transport, which is out a week today, to see a write-up of today's event, as well as last week's session, which was, of course, from Norway. As I mentioned, the sessions are being recorded each week, and have now been, the 4 previous ones anyway, have now been uploaded to YouTube, and you can get them from there. If you want a copy of the slides, although I haven't asked Thomas this, I don't know whether you'd be prepared to share your slides as a PDF, Thomas, but you can get the previous 4 editions simply by sending an email to events@brtuk.com, and I'll send you what you need. Thomas, as a matter of fact, would you be prepared to make your slides available?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. If you can send me a PDF of them, then at some point I can give them to anyone who wants them. So that's wonderful, Thomas. Thank you so much. We carry on our series next week when we're off to Kent to catch up with Fast Track, when Shane Heimers of Kent County Council will have lots to tell about what's been happening there and what's going to happen there, more to the point. So that's next Thursday, 30th of June, in the penultimate of these 7 lunchtime masterclasses supported by Atkins. Do make sure that you don't miss it. Just a reminder then that these masterclasses are going on every week until the 7th of July. It's the same link on Zoom each time, each week. So do join us at 12:30 in a week's time using that same link. So with a very big thank you again, therefore, to our guest today, Thomas Ableman, and indeed, thanks to all of you as ever, our audience. This is James Freeman signing off for BRT UK until a week today, 30th of June. So thank you very much, and
Thank you.
see you
Bye.
next week. Cheers.
Bye-bye.